Hi everyone, good afternoon. Can we have a quick mic test of our speakers, please?
Good afternoon, Altamas.
Hi sir, how are you?
I'm good, Altamas.
So this is just again a follow-up session to that previous one, the one you were part of July 1st. Hi Karen ma'am, good afternoon. Eklavya sir.
Good afternoon, Altamas.
Hi sir, Dr. Nirmalya.
Hi.
Mr. Amal.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon sir. So we'll be shortly beginning sir in just 2 minutes. Hi Hari, good afternoon.
Hi, Altamas.
I think we can begin now, Hari, if you allow. Hari, you are muted.
Yes, we can start. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Am I audible clearly?
Loud and clear.
Thank you. So hello and good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to a very important session, especially when there's monsoon season going on in India during July to October, especially. So it's very important to assess the situation, review the situation, especially the flood situation in India. And for that only, we have met today to review the current flood situation in the country, especially the challenges that are being faced, the lessons learned from previous floods, the recent flash floods especially, as well as the innovations for integrated flood risk management. So I'm Altamash Khan. I'm program coordinator for IC Vertical of Sphere India. Just giving you the background for today's session, why we are meeting and what we will be discussing today, what will be the objective and outcome of this session. So we are, most of us are quite aware that India is a very flood-prone country. It's very highly vulnerable to floods. Out of the total geographical area of 329 million hectares, more than 40 million hectare region is flood-prone. Flood risk management requires the coordination of numerous activities, including the planning of developments, land management, flood warning, community involvement, and physical structure to increase resilience of communities to flood risk as well as reducing their risk. The leading causes of floods in India are incessant monsoon rainfall, reduced river channel carrying capacity for high flows, riverbank erosion, and the situation of channel beds, poor natural drainage in the flood prone areas, cloudbursts, and several other meteorological factors. There have been multiple devastating floods in different regions of India in recent past years, among which the Mumbai flood in 2005, Bihar floods in 2007 and 2008, Assam flood in 2012, Uttarakhand flood in 2013, Jammu and Kashmir floods in 2014, Chennai flood in 2015, and the Kerala floods in 2018 are some of the identified as the most severe ones. So to review the status of floods in India with a specific focus on the situation in Assam, Gujarat, Telangana, and nearing states, Sphere India is organizing a session on flood situation in India, challenges, lessons learned, and innovations for integrated flood risk management with representatives from academia, IAGs, NGOs, INGOs, COCs, etc. We have certain objective of today's session, like to review the current flood situation, to identify needs and explore all possible channels of collaborations for a robust preparedness mechanism for floods in India, to document the response strategy adopted by disaster management agencies and representatives from government, IAG, CSOs in the recent past, as well as the lessons learned and the way forward, to develop a joint action for government organization and between, GO and NGO coordination for post-disaster relief and recovery, as well as to learn innovative approaches for flood risk management in the country. So without wasting much time, I'd like to quickly introduce our speakers for today. We have with us Mr. Amal Krishna. Mr. Amal is a professional in environment, social, and governance management with a specialization in disaster risk resilience and sustainability solutions. He has more than 17 years of experience in a wide spectrum of programs with working experiences in United Nations, state, central government, and INGOs. Over the stint, he was positioned as corporate security and business continuity manager, country level officer for India and Sri Lanka under Deutsche Bank. He has also worked as state officer under government of Andhra Pradesh, government of Kerala, and other international NGOs. He has been working with UNICEF since the year 2017. Mr. Amal will be speaking on some sectoral challenges from the ground zero and need for risk-informed governance. We also have Ms. Karen Shiva. She's from Maharashtra, Piconet in Maharashtra state. Ms. Karen is an award-winning social entrepreneur, writer, speaker, and trainer. She has been deeply involved in the women empowerment, community development, and social entrepreneurship space even before founding IDO Bro, which is an organization founded by her. Karen has over 20 years of experience in Asia and the United States in technology, education, finance, geomology, and development sectors. She lived in India, US, Africa, and Japan. She is also a certified faculty mentor by NEN London Business School and previously a visiting faculty at NMIMS Mumbai. Ms. Karen will be sharing her thoughts on the power of a collective. Now we have Mr. Eklavya Prasad, who is a managing trustee at Make Pine Abhiyan. Mr. Eklavya is working with Make Pine Abhiyan, literally meaning Cloud Water Campaign. MPA works in partnership with local non-government organizations and supported by resource institutions, individuals, and volunteers in rural North Bihar and rural and urban areas of Dhanbad district in Jharkhand. Prasad has been guided by the experiences accumulated while working on several rural concerns for past 25 years. Perceptions and actions of Eklavya Prasad have been guided by the experiences accumulated while working on wide-ranging rural issues, carrying out field action research, conducting monitoring and evaluation tasks in South and Southeast Asia and Eastern Central Africa, steering grassroots implementation agencies, and mentoring students and professionals. Mr. Eklavya will be sharing his thoughts on Let's Understand Floods Are Not the Same. And we have Dr. Nirmala Chaudhary. He has a doctorate from Technical University Berlin. He's a postgraduate. He also has a postgraduate diploma in forest management from the IIFM Bhopal and postgraduate degree in economics from Calcutta University. He currently works for the Center for Disaster Management, Jamshedji Tata and Tata School of Disaster Studies, TIS Mumbai. Over the years, his research has focused on diverse water governance issues, including participatory irrigation management, sustainable hydropower development, and water and livelihoods. In the recent years, he has been working on multiple developmental challenges, vulnerabilities, and resilience building of people residing in the recurrent flood-prone areas in Ganga-Brahmaputra basin. He'll be speaking on challenges, learnings, and possibilities for flood risk management, as well as some reflections on the recent floods in Assam. And I must mention that it was a very comprehensive and wonderful article by Dr. Nirmala, and recently published article in the Indian Express. So congratulations for that also to Dr. Nirmala. And finally, we have Mr. Ajay Govley, who is a Vice President, Community Impact at United Way, Mumbai. Mr. Ajay heads the Community Impact Initiative of the United Way, Mumbai. As part of the senior management, he has successfully helped in forming strategic alliances with local and state government bodies, international organizations, and other stakeholders to implement high-impact projects in community-related issues. His core areas of expertise include program development, multi-stakeholder partnership management, and community participation. His expertise is working on organizational strategy, development, and human resource-related matters. Mr. Ajay has earned an MA in social work from TIS Mumbai. He has specialized in urban and rural community development. Also, the moderator for today is our colleague, Mr. V.R. Hari Balaji. Hari is a program manager with the Interagency Coordination Vertical at Sphere India. He is an hotelier turned humanitarian with experience of 3 continents, Asia, Europe, and North America. He has got deep-rooted disaster management experience, both in pre-disaster training and post-disaster multi-sectoral collaborative humanitarian response. He has served as a consultant for multiple projects in government, NGOs, international NGOs, corporate, and educational institutions. On academic front, Mr. Hari is a visiting professor at MIT World Peace University, Pune. He is also a visiting professor at MAM School of Engineering, Trichy, and an adjunct professor at Savita School of Law, Chennai. So that's it about the introduction part of our panelists for today. I would again welcome all the participants, our key esteemed speakers for today's important session. And we really look forward to a very engaging and insightful deliberations with you all. Thank you, and over to you, Mr. Hari. Please kindly take it forward from here as a moderator. Thank you.
Thank you, Altamash. Good afternoon to everyone. We will start with Mr. Amal. Mr. Amal, you can start with sectoral challenges which are faced and from the ground level and the need of risk-informed governance. Over to you, Mr. Amal.
Thank you so much, Hari. Thank you so much. And good afternoon, everyone. And thanks to Altamash and all other team members. So here, anyway, actually, now I am working in the field, actually, because here I'm taking care of Andhra and Telangana. So flood situations are here. So that is why, anyway, it's a crucial situation now. So anyway, thank you so much for hosting such kind of a wonderful program, because this is, in Sphere India, I think during our flood situations in Kerala also, we had conducted so many programs. So, and it is continuing. Anyway, thank you so much for organizing, and personally, thank you so much for inviting me. So I think I can, I have a small presentation. So can I share the screen?
Yeah, sure, sir. I have shared the co-host right with you.
Okay, I hope it's visible.
Yeah, it's visible, sir.
Yeah, I thought I can start with this one because one of the best photograph I am considering. This is after the flood rescue operations during 2018 after Kerala floods. So I think this is in the this like because that was a proud moment. Like because when I started my career in disaster management, like it was a struggling situation even in my family also, personally speaking. Like and many of the colleagues, many of the friends, they are also asked like why you are going for this profession, because even we didn't heard about this. And of course, like because now I am really proud because through this profession we can do lot of things, like lots and lots of things, and we can changing the lives of many people. So that is why I'm really proud. And yeah, see this during this operation, like we got chance to operationalize two carriers, like C-130 and C-17. That is the biggest carriers in India, so under Indian Air Force. So that was a golden opportunity and rescued lots of lives. So, and it is still continuing. So that is the glory of disaster management anyway. And yeah, so I would like to share some thoughts about this sectoral challenges and, of course, risk-informed governance, which is very much required in current scenarios. Because I can tell you a few of the examples. See, in this is the recent number. Like this is the impact in numbers of recent AP floods, Godavari floods in AP. And recently we have conducted this rapid need assessment, and then again Kerala floods. See, these numbers are very big. And now also Kerala is experiencing another flood situation even in many districts. Now today I'm in Kerala, and here also around 9 districts are under red alert. So it's a crucial situation here also. But see, if this year also if flood happens, then almost same number or maybe around these numbers will again come. So what is the reason behind that? So that means the sustainable development or risk informed planning, whether it is happening or not. That is why I thought it is better to share, so that many of our colleagues, many of our partners, NGOs and governments all are here, so that it will be definitely help them to develop or mold their strategies, because risk informed governance is an important part. Otherwise everything will happen like the what happened in previously. So that is why I'm concentrating on these sectors, basically like wash, shelter, food, nutrition, education, health, temporary shelters, and of course cross-cutting issues as DRR and climate change. So see, these are few of the examples I would like to share from the ground zero whenever we are into response. Like see, one important thing is water distribution. Now even in around 6 districts in Andhra Pradesh, almost all, like around 300 plus villages were inundated. And that means all the water distribution systems and water conservation system, all these systems are actually affected, drastically affected. So how they will get water, drinking water, quality drinking water? So now different source of water, like maybe bottles, maybe 20-liter cans and all those things. So there are lots of gap. Whether, and one important thing is actually the rural water supply department is there, and urban departments are there. So they need to have a small thing, like I don't know how many of the government departments are participating here, but one important thing is a quality check, end-to-end quality check. At least one strategy should be there, because otherwise, see, many people are contributing and whatever the quality, and because afterwards, like loads of diseases are also coming. So these are the issues actually. These are from I'm telling it from the ground. Okay, so that is one important thing. And also another thing is, see, many private organizations are there, many other institutions are there where the water purifiers are available, but we don't have exact resource mapping, and many are under maybe some small repair is required, if because see, procurement is very important. I am dealing the administrative part and also the rescue part, even though UN won't allow in rescue, but fortunately I got like support from governments. That is why I got opportunity to take part in responses. So that is why, see, administrative, if we are looking at administrative part, the procurement process is very difficult. Actually, it takes time sometimes, and there are other glitches are also there. So that is one part. And another thing, see, there are lots of facilities, existing facilities are there, but we don't have a resource, proper dynamic resource mapping. So if that is there, see, when few of my colleagues personally visited, and they found that there are machineries, they need just repairs. So we have to spend 2 lakhs for one machine, and we can if we spend 2000 or 3000 rupees, that repair will happen, and it can recover within maybe half a day or 2-3 hours, so that we can give good water. Because see, if people need water, and if we are providing it after 2 days, there is no it is like the effort will go in vain. So that is why this prompt action is required. So there are other things also there, but related to water, this is one of the important things. So maybe a resource mapping, and the availability and the quality and quantity checking, that is one thing in response phase. And another one is temporary shelter. See, temporary shelters during the time of response, who is managing? Actually, see, there were lots of community task force were there. And in Andhra, like states, there are multi-purpose cyclone shelters are there, and they are also using sometimes as the shelter for flood situations also. And these are huge constructions. It can accommodate nearly 900 to 1200 people in one shelter. So there also, like the strengthening of the community or the committees, like multi-purpose shelter management committees, and these committees needs to be strengthened, because otherwise during the time of emergencies, one important thing is the resource management, of course, resource management. And another one is safety. Safe, because see, recently we have conducted this rapid need assessment. In that, many people are under psychosocial stress, and some other things related to children and women, because trafficking cases and sexual abuse cases, so those things are there. So that means there is a strong strategy is required. And after this also, there are chances of more trafficking cases, because many of the people affected, like livelihood got affected. So that is one important scenario. And electricity, this was like a electricity means there are different chances. See, like when I was appointed as the team lead for rescue operation. Like when we are going to Alapi in Kerala during 2018 flood, even the water level was around 2 feet, sorry, 2 meters, 2.5 meter, around 3 meter height. So that means it can reach the electric lines. And even in that situation also, the bulbs were lightning. So that means if something happens, then what about our lives? What about the lives of the people there? So that kind of coordination is not happening sometimes. I'm not saying that every time it is happening, but sometimes. So these kinds of things should be there before disaster. Like in the plan itself, these kinds of small things should be considered, because practically we are facing these kinds of things. And early warning and dissemination, if we consider Andhra, I think in technology wise, Andhra is first, because they have initiated like lightning warning system. And in communication, redundancy systems are around 7-8 kind of things are there, and mass communication systems are there, SMS, and then SMBVT systems are there. So these are alternatives for redundancy in communication facilities in Andhra Pradesh. But for the last mile connectivity, actually, we need to empower our community-based organizations. See, early warning for lightning is there. Of course, we can predict lightning before 40 minutes. Before 40 minutes with the location and intensity. Okay, that message will reach to one mobile phone. Okay, then the farmer who is working in the field, then how it can be connected with them, because he is more vulnerable. So for that, maybe we have to strengthen the local community level volunteers and organizations. So that gap is still existing. And even during this recent flood situation also, in our questionnaire we have included this, whether they have got any early warning messages or early warning communication from the authorities. So that percentage is around 33 percentage. Only 33 percentage of people got the early warnings messages or communication, even though the most advanced systems are there. Okay, and then healthcare. See, that is also one of the important thing, because like many people are struggling now because they are not getting medicines and therapy for the mentally retarded people and differentially able people. Usually the health CHCs and PSCs, they are providing all the normal whatever medicines and other facilities, but unfortunately these things are lacking. So that is one of the important thing we need to concentrate. Mentally retarded people, they need some therapies, and some support is required. So handling these children, handling these people is very difficult. And if these people are relocated to any shelter, and within that shelter, management of these people is very difficult. I am personally knowing many cases. I have case studies also. So that is why this is one of the important scenario we need to tackle. And local things like snake bites and all, because if we consider Andhra, there are cases are very very high. So but usually, see, we are considering lightning as one of the major hazard, flood as one of the major hazard. See, in as per the studies, around 5,200 people are dying every year in Andhra Pradesh. So what about the other, like recent floods, 7 deaths were happened. Okay, so if we compare with the other hazards or disasters, so this is also one of the important number. So we have to do some researches on that. What is the reason behind? Okay, and then related to relief and rehabilitation. See, here we can have some risk informed governance. If we are saying about a house and critical infrastructure, I can tell you one example from East Godavari. During 2019, sorry, 2018, there was flood, and one house was totally demolished, destroyed, and government has spent around 4 lakh rupees, and some organizations also spent some amount, and they reconstructed it. And during 2020, again flood happened, and the same house again collapsed. So that means we spent money, and then we created the structure, we recreated the structure, but now also the family doesn't have a shelter, and we spend money already. So that means that kind of development is not sustainable. So if we are constructing especially houses or critical infrastructure, that we need to have some, because this maybe the planning department, maybe the panchayati raj department, they are concentrating on these issues. Okay, and they should have in their plan saying that, okay, this house is destroyed because of flood. Okay, when they are reconstructing it, their plan should be like, okay, vulnerability analysis should be there, and if that place is vulnerable and there is no other place to relocate, then they can construct house, but it should be resilient, maybe floating or maybe pillar or whatever that kind of ecosystem, that environment requires, that should be there. That is called a risk informed governance. Okay, so that is one important thing. And livelihood in Andhra Pradesh, hectares of land, most of the people are depending on agriculture and aquaculture. So almost all in these villages, around 300 plus villages, these livelihood opportunities are lost now. So that means again, like 2018 also it happened, 19 also it happened, 20 also it happened, and now also it is happening. So that means every time we are spending money, but then we need to focus on whether any alternative source is required, any alternative system is required. Like I can tell one example from Kerala. In Alapi, actually there are roads, but we cannot use those roads. Like 7 months we cannot use in a year. That means 12 months are there, and 7 months we cannot depend on those roads, and remaining 5 months we can use it, but there are loads of maintenance and all those activities will be there. Then what is the need of that road? Maybe we need to have some other alternative sources, maybe some solar boats or something is required, like Thailand or any other countries. So that kind of system should be there. If we cannot use it, then don't go for that. So but government or many other agencies, they are still following the same path, so that won't sustain. So I am not blaming any organization or any government, but these things, if we can integrate these things, definitely we whatever we are spending, that will definitely go for a sustainable development. Ultimately the deprived families, they will get the support. That is it. And the program and activity, see, risk informed governance, I already told. Like there was one program called Matrupurna is nothing but it is a nutrition program where we give cooked food for the pregnant women. Okay, and it is cooked food actually. So see, if we are planning such a program, so it is for the year long, that means for the 12 months. Okay, so during the month of March, April, May, the temperature in Telangana or Andhra Pradesh is may cross 44 degrees. And during these time the flood will happen, and during the time of cyclone, that is another hazard. So these all period, this kind of program will get disturbed. So that means we need to have an alternative measure during the time of disasters. So that kind of a plugin should be there when we are planning for such program. So that is simply called a risk informed program planning. I hope all can understand this, what I'm discussing. If any queries are there, you can raise, no issue. And then resource mapping. I have already discussed in the case of water distribution. So here also, but it should be dynamic and geotagged. In Andhra, now we are developing one system. It is called real-time governance in disaster management. That is where BOC is developed, and also geospatial lab is already set up. So in that we can have real-time monitoring system, but that also needs to be like because it should be user friendly, and many capacity building programs are required. So a dynamic and geotagged resource mapping is essential. Otherwise we cannot see. If you are going for a flood rescue, these things will comes to your mind, because if that is geotagged, then definitely we will get the location. Okay, and maybe it may be a shelter, or it may be any kind of water resources, or maybe other volunteers or whatever. So these kinds of informations are required during the time of response, and of course in relief and rehabilitation. Then geo coordination. See, for the last mile
Excuse me,
connectivity
sir.
response.
Can you please wind up?
Sorry.
Can you please try to conclude, sir?
Okay, fine.
Thank you.
Okay, so these are some of the concerns came into my mind, and of course my presentation is, I think, many slides are remaining. Can I take just 2 minutes?
Yeah, sure.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Altamash. So these are some of the things which we need to have some consideration when we are planning, or when we are making any strategies. See, these are some of the critical infrastructure, see, which are affected during the time of many flights when we operate. So see, if these things are affecting during the time, then how we can depend? These are critical infrastructures that should work at any time. So that means every time when we are planning any kinds of such critical infrastructure or critical resources, sources and services, we need to have some risk should be considered, or vulnerability should be considered. Anyway, I'm skipping all these things. So these are anyway, I think I can share the presentation. So like it should be micro level. Then only we can have some, see, already programs are there, but we need to have some adjustments in that program based on the vulnerability mapping and based on the risk analysis. That is simply called a risk informed governance. Okay, so that is it. Anyway, thank you so much. So this is in this way we can have some adaptations. Like already programs are there, we need to have some adaptation so that it won't disturb you during the time of disasters. That's it. Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Amal. Key points which you have touched on: importance of having dynamic resource mapping and committees to be strengthened, mainly on the psychosocial part, and the need for stronger strategies. The last mile planning and connectivity, these are some of the key areas which you have touched, and of course, we will have a QA session where we'll discuss more. Now, I would like to invite Ms. Karen Shaiva to discuss on the power of collective. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you so much, Hari, and thank you very much, Adaptation and Sphere India, for inviting me. I think that presentation was simply amazing, Amal Krishna, and I do hope you will share it with us, because I'm pretty sure, not pretty sure, I am absolutely sure that it will be of great value to everybody over here. And of course, a complete technical session that deserves actually a complete session just by itself. But thank you so much for sharing that, and I learned a lot already. Just
thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much.
So yeah, I think I'm going to be really changing the entire conversation. But what Amal Krishna shared is really a very good foundation for me to take on the subject that I'm talking about, which is about the power of a collective, right, during an emergency, and more specifically when we are talking about floods. As you know, I am from the Governing Council and the Secretariat for the MahaPicoNet, which is a unified response platform that was originally formed during COVID, but naturally by UNICEF Maharashtra. And we had about 65 partners when we got started over there, which went up to more than 100 partners post that. Of course, working together to fight COVID across 2 years naturally led us to also deal with other kind of emergencies during that period, which were floods, cyclones, landslides, and other issues, right? And so, of course, floods became one very important thing. I think one of the things that has really been wonderful to see happening is during disasters, many people do tend to come together. There is no doubt about it. That's a very human nature response that kind of happens. Unfortunately, most of us tend to drift apart once the crisis is over and we start getting into everything that we are doing. That in the case of the MahaPicoNet, we're really pleased and proud to say that that has not been the case, right? Most of our partners are together. In fact, we have even grown further. And today, I can say, with complete pride, as I said, is that we have at least one partner in every single district of Maharashtra. At least one partner. So this really makes us a complete pan-state, entity, and allows us, therefore, to really reach out to whichever part requires our help, support, and also vice versa, that we know what's happening in every single part of the state, right? And this is very important when we talk about the flood situation, because last year was our first real experience as a collective. Before that, of course, all our members have been very, very responsive to different emergencies, including floods. But as a collective, I think last year was our first year. And the very first thing that we did, was, of course, to go on to the ground, right? But the minute you get onto the ground, or the minute you get into the thick of the situation, you start realizing the value of a collective, right? I think the problems are so huge. I think they can overwhelm anybody. They overwhelm the government, remember that, right? Even the government needs assistance at a time like that. So can you imagine if you're a single NGO or a single corporate, whoever may be your background, right? Even the largest donors, I think you definitely get overwhelmed because there's so much to be done. The situation is so dynamic. There are so many issues to deal with. And just now, as Amal Krishna so well pointed out, right? It is cross-sectoral issues. It is cross-target and constituencies. It is across all kinds of profiles, right? How do you deal with this if you are alone, right? But if you are in a collective, 101%, you'll be able to reach out to somebody. And even if you cannot reach out, perhaps you can call out and someone will reach out to you. And I think that's what we saw happening last year. As soon as our partners got onto the ground, we realized the situation was so bad that immediately, okay, a joint rapid need assessment was conducted with Spear India as, of course, leading us with it from a technical point of view. Again, the power of collective and the power of partnership and collaboration. And then we also had Radar with us, and we had over 100 volunteers from different organizations who were trained overnight, literally in not even 24 hours. We had continuous training sessions that were organized so that we could get collection of data right from the ground. Right? The entire exercise took us 96 hours. I'm sorry, 48 hours, and we reached out to 996 people on the ground. But that's not the story. The story is who was in that 996 households that we managed to reach out within those 24 hours, and creating a report within 48 hours is really the power again of the collective. The most remotest area, we would keep getting messages saying that we know that there are people stuck in that place, but we can't reach it, right? So how do we do that? And there were so many different ways that we were discussing. Okay, it's not just about a survey, right? That's just one part of what requires to be done. The other part is also understanding how to go there and help them and do what we can. So while it is like while the GRNA was in process, we were also trying to find ways to help those people that we were reaching out to. And I think that's a lot of work to be done, which cannot again be done alone. And it's because you're part of a collective that you can do it. Again, some of the things that Amal Krishna spoke about, in terms of, it's just not about just shelter. It is also about talking about so many other connected issues to that. How do you then, ensure that you're really meeting the real needs other than what you can find very obvious? Some of the things are very obvious, but something like just take mental counseling, mental issues, right? Is that obvious? Not at all. You can assume it, but it is not obvious. And you don't know exactly how to deliver it either, right? So how do you do that? How do you reach out to, let's say, if there's a pregnant woman, how do you reach out if there are some senior citizens? How do you reach out to people with disability? How do you take care of animals? That's a big issue during disaster. Yes, of course, we are people-centric, but animals are another issue. Definitely, you do not have the expertise to manage all of these things. And the minute you're a part of a collective, somebody, as I said, you may just call out because you may not even be able to reach out. You may not even know whom to reach out to, but just your voice coming out there. A collective allows you to build up the power of your voice and your agency. I think that the confidence that if I call out, somebody will respond. Somebody will tell me some answers, or at least point me in the right direction. I think those are huge things to take away with. And very often people say, oh, udhar kuch hota nahi hai, which is why they don't want to be part of a collective. Yes, sometimes kuch nahi hota, some kuch bahut kuch hota hai, right? That's the reality, because everybody has their own priority. Everybody has their own interest. Everybody has their own constituency. Everybody has their own expertise, and everybody has their own donors. So obviously there is going to be some amount of, I wouldn't like to use the word conflict, because I think in a collective, you cannot have that. But you will have stretched priorities, right? That takes you in different directions. And because of that, some tension gets created, like in any kind of a band, right? If you take a rubber band and you pull it in different directions, tension hota hi hai. But tension should not become a conflict. I think there are ways to deal with tension. And I think that's the role that the Secretariat plays a lot, where we try to make sure that we are the neutral body that allows and helps to connect people, connect partners, provide the support, provide the technical documentation that is required at the back end to help people to be more transparent, more accountable. These are very, very, very critical things to ensure the success of a collective. And we ourselves are now going into our third year, right? So third year for very formal structure, in fact, to make sure we strengthen our collective even more. And of course, invite more and more members to be a part of it. So this is a little bit about what, as I said, we did in the flood situation. I think, beyond the GRMA and being on the ground, I think collections, one thing you have to understand is that and the more diverse your collective, I must say, the better it is. Unfortunately, mostly we tend to have collectives that are very uniform. That is, everybody working in health, everybody working in education, everybody. So I think the more you encourage diversity in your collective, the better it is. Yes, you do need one thing that holds everybody together to believe that, yes, this is why we are together. Sure, that's the ownership part. But the roles have to be different. And as per the MahaPicoNet, which is our model, the PicoNet is the model, we say you need partners who provide resources, you need entrepreneurs who provide solutions, and you need citizens who will be able to take your solutions to a particular constituency or target group, etc. And that's really, again, the power. So there is many NGOs, or there are many of our members who are good at on the ground. They are the citizens who will take what solutions you have to the people. We need the entrepreneurs who have solutions, who are innovative. And this does not mean that it is a for-profit. It can be a non-profit or a for-profit who has solutions to offer. You need those kind of people because they know what needs to be done. They know how to get something done. They know the kind of innovations required to create better solutions for the community, right? And last but not the least is you have partners who are able to get resources, either of their own or it is from someone else. So very often, and this happened again, last year during the floods, and again this year, in fact, I would say, where there are some NGOs who raised funds, who did collection drives wherever they were, and managed to put together a lot of resources, whether they were, clothing, mats, household items, medicines, water filtration units, something as simple as hygiene things like toothpaste, and all that was kind of done by back-end members. I won't say back-end, I think that's the wrong word to use, but the members who were, off the ground and then were provided to the partners who were on the ground for distribution. So that was a great way to see that collective coming through. And again, this year, we had the very same thing. It was a very short time period, but even in that short, but obviously difficult period for people on the ground, there was enough support that came in from the back end. And then, of course, creating, situational reports, which again, as a secretary, we do, helps our members know what is happening, help our members know how to take decisions of what to do further, where is the need, where is things happening. Like right now, when we are looking at ration kits being distributed, we don't just say, okay, just give 500 here, just give 500 here, give 500. No, we will find out what is the situation on the ground. We will understand where the need really is, who really needs it, and then decide how the assistance should go. We are not doing a checklist activity, right, at the end of the day. And so that, again, becomes a very important role, both for the secretariat as well as the collective as a whole. And the last thing that I want to say, and I don't want to take too much time because I know there are many other speakers after me and I'm waiting to hear them as well. So I'm going to just end with talking about two very quick things, one is about the disaster cycle, because finally we are talking here about that kind of a situation, about responding to it. And I think while all of us are great at the response and the recovery part, I think we need to do a lot more on the mitigation and the preparedness part. And year after year, we go through the same situation and nothing changes. And I think that's terrible. That's really sad. And that's where I think a lot of focus has to start getting into as to how do we take care of mitigation and how do we take care of preparedness. We at the MahaPicoNet and Rise Infinity Foundation as a secretariat is really working very, very closely on that. And in some ways partnering with both Sphere India, Red Art, to see how we can build the capacity of our NGOs, especially the grassroots NGOs, because they are the nearest on the ground. They are the first responders. How do you then build that capacity so that they can respond? How do you build the systems and processes so that data is collected easily, so that information flow is well done, and also aid is provided at the right time to the right people? Because aid, if it is given after a long time, yes, we need aid during recovery too, no doubt about it. But we first need it during the response phase. And so if you don't do it at the right time, it is delayed, and that may not be a satisfactory situation for all of us. So I think we really, really need to look at those things very, very closely. And I think from a recovery, somewhere, we talk about recovery and rehabilitation, but perhaps it is not enough. I think people's memory, especially media memory, is very short. It is only during the time of the event. Most of it stops after a few days. I'm not talking weeks, I'm not talking months. Literally after a few days, it is all forgotten. It is the NGOs on the ground who continue to work hard, work perhaps with the government, okay? And that again needs a lot more strengthening, the GO-NGO coordination. And that's where the power of a collective becomes very important, because that makes it easier to deal with the government, vice versa. Right? And so I think these are some of the things that we need to keep in mind when we talk about working in disaster space, working to respond to emergencies, that being as a part of a collective, no matter who you are, no matter how big you are, no matter how much money you have, no matter how famous you are, or no matter how strong you think you are, I think the power of collective is far more bigger and stronger than any one of us individually. And so I'd encourage each one of you to be a part of a collective, wherever you are, in whichever place you are, find the right kind of group that you should be a part of, and contribute and gain a benefit from it. With that, thank you so much.
Thank you, Ms. Karen. Mainly the essence of working together and the level of the disasters, the magnitude requires this kind of collective, and importance of sharing the data in a timely manner. And the main thing where you touched on the GO-NGO coordination part, some real value points which will be definitely useful for all of us. With this, I'll invite Mr. Eklavya Prasad to talk on let's understand the floods are not same.
Thank you, Spherinder. Am I audible?
Yes, loud and clear.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Hari, so much for giving us the opportunity to come and speak and share our experiences. And thanks to both the speakers. You all have set the tone of today's webinar. Can I share my screen? Oh, okay. So during the introduction, Altamash did mention that Make Pine Abhiyan works with the local organizations, people, volunteers. And today, the presentation that I'm going to make is basically a condensation of what we have learned as a collective and how thoughts have changed over a period of time, and how we have been able to highlight issues which otherwise go totally ignored. So while talking about, and this is how I've divided my presentation, we talk about floods as it's shown, typologies, concerns, understanding floods and the ways forward, in which I'll be sharing the innovations as well. So I will not be wrong in saying that during the flood season or the monsoon season, these are the photographs that we often come across, either in the newspapers or in the reports or government websites. This is what we tend to see as far as floods are concerned. And different kind of scenarios. Definitely the common point is a lot of water, houses being inundated, people kind of wading through, a lot of water. So, and also in terms of destruction, etc. Now, this actually helps the people to form an opinion about how floods are. But in reality, things are different. So the photographs that I showed you earlier, I'm kind of bringing it into the context in which these photographs were taken. These photographs are actually a projection of a particular kind of flood and this is all being sourced from North Bihar. So we have riverine floods, post the breach, we have waterlogged regions, and then we have floods, waterlogging, and inundation. So basically what I'm trying to say is that there is an intent, there is a kind of a strategy to uniform floods as an event. And when you actually go and start interacting, you realize that they are not the same. And why do I say that? I say that because, if you look at, just one second. So if you look at the kind of type, and this, when I started work in Bihar way back in 2005, I had this whole idea about how flood happens to be a uniform phenomenon. And by 2013, we realized that things are not the same, and this entire years from 2005 to 2013, the kind of work that we did actually helped us in identifying the different typologies of floods. And why was it important for us to know the different typologies? Because there was an intervention on water that we did across these regions, across 5 districts in North Bihar. And when we were kind of trying to understand the impact of that particular water intervention, we realized that the outcomes were different. The problems were the same, the scenario was the same, but the outcomes were different. And that led us to get finer detail in terms of why there is a difference in terms of responses. And that is how we started looking into different typologies of floods. Now, this brings in the complexity of floods. Floods is just not about inundation. Flood is just not about people getting drowned or land getting inundated, agriculture. It is a complex mix wherein in terms of the period, in terms of occurrence, in terms of inundation. So for us to even think in terms of responding to floods, it is important that we start from the basic. And the basic actually will give us a lot of insights in terms of how do we look at issues there. Now, when we talk about floods, it has a plethora, and I think so it was well articulated both by Amal and Karen in terms of what are the problems that people tend to face during floods. And I have listed some of them that we encountered while working during floods in Bihar, starting from 2007, 2020, 2008, 2013, 2016, 17, 19, 20. So kind of, it is when you have an approach like, of a uniform approach, saying that, you're dealing with floods and let's look at floods and see how we can respond and what we look into. We don't realize that, whether we are actually addressing the problem in terms of flash floods or we are looking at riverine floods, because the whole character is different. So it is important for us to bring in this clarity in terms of which type of floods are we interacting with, or we are trying to address the related issues. So basically, when we talk about understanding floods, it has got a kind of a framework. Now, this is not something which is closed. It all evolves. So we also have kind of evolved the whole understanding of floods since the time we started work in 2005. So it's all about flood cycle. So we tend to be very focused during the floods, when the floods are occurring. But then if you look at, for me personally, I say that for me, the impact of flood is throughout the year. It is pre-phase, it is during and post. And in a place where it is kind of reoccurring, you need to realize that a problem keeps getting manifested every year. I think so this point was also highlighted by both the earlier 2 speakers. We need to understand in terms of what are the linked themes, who are the diverse stakeholders involved, what kind of knowledge is still there. I mean, some of the issues that we have been able to raise or address is largely being substantiated, helped, questioned, ignored by the local knowledge systems, which actually helped us to, better our entire approach, in which we failed, and then we again tried, and then there was kind of a success. So when we talk about approach or understanding towards floods, it is important that we look into the details of local floods, the preparations, the precautions, response, and recovery, both from a state's perspective, both and also as far as the community is concerned. And as Karen did mention about collective action for flood-related challenges, it is one of the ways of also understanding floods. Now, from a macro perspective, we need to also get into the micro when we are talking about floods and trying to figure out as to what floods are all about and how do we actually understand what needs to be done. There is again a kind of a framework which basically looks at micro level interventions to macro, from starting from policies, then in terms of development plans and practices, looking at even the category of rivers. And this is so critical, and we tend to miss this out. We tend to just look at the inundation, but we don't realize as to what is the river, what is the character of the river, how does the river behave, and when does the river gets inundated. Could be a flash flood, could be a riverine flood, could be waterlogging. I mean, as per the typologies. So it is important in a lot many ways that, before even we think of jumping into a kind of a response mode, which is so very critical, it is important to have a greater understanding of the river that we are trying to, or the floods brought in by a particular river that we are trying to respond to. So ways forward that we have been working on is basically one that we don't tend to see because it's being talked in isolation. We look at verticals within this, but there has not been much work done in terms of the flood resilient habitat. When I'm talking about habitat, it's not about housing. We have listed some of the essentials, but there are many that can be added. We don't have agriculture in this, that can be added. We need to bring in livelihoods, we need to bring in education. But then why is it so that there has not been much talk about building flood resilient habitats in regions which suffer from floods on an annual basis? Now that needs to be looked into, explored, and otherwise we'll keep working on verticals and it's not going to help. Somehow it will land us up in the same kind of a scenario year in and year out. The innovations that we have done is basically in terms of two verticals. One is sanitation and the other is drinking water. The drinking water work was with regard to how can we decentralize an approach where we are able to bring in the whole element of access to safe water during floods. And this is where we had introduced the concept of temporary rainwater harvesting in Bihar. And that is why the name Megh Pine Abhiyan, because the area where we were working was in Mithila, and in Maithili, Megh is cloud, Pine is water, and campaign is, of course, Abhiyan is campaign. So this is how we started with introducing of temporary rainwater harvesting in flood-prone areas. And we saw its impact during 2007, 2008, 2013, and 2020 floods in Bihar. So this is one of the innovations that we've been working on. The second one is what we call as Faideman Shauchale, or it's called the EcoSan. Now, these are toilets that we have constructed in a village in Paschim Champaran, Naya Tola Bishambarpur, in Bhagwanpur Panchayat, Northern Block, Paschim Champaran. This particular toilet has actually now seen almost floods 4 times in 4 years since its construction, and it still provides access to people even during floods. And this is a big thing. We recently did a study in Bihar, in this particular village, to understand as to how we have done with regard to the intervention. And it seems that the access of toilet is a very critical aspect for people not to go to embankments for when the village is inundated. Now, if you look at the first photograph, the structure which you see on your left is actually a toilet built under Swachh, the SBMG, the Swachh Bharat mission. And this is a toilet which got completely inundated. and the Faidaman Shauchalaya is one which did provide access. So this is another innovation that we have done, and this is actually being seen as one of the ways in which we can still provide sanitation facilities to people in areas which confront floods on a recurring basis. So basically, what are we trying to look at? Why am I presenting today? My whole motive of coming here and to share my thoughts and that of Make Pine Abhiyan is basically to propagate the idea that flood is not a uniform entity. It is very different, and we need to understand that. It is also important that we should start talking about typologies. The more nuanced we get, the better our inputs and our solution would be, and our approach as well. When we talk about flood resilient habitat, sorry, it should be FRH. That's a typo. The FRH plan must develop in sync of the entire flood cycle. So let's not look at just during. We need to understand that there are problems in the pre, the during, and the post. So it is important that we all look into this aspect. And finally, which is for me, it's extremely important that we start looking and talking and exploring the option of providing rooms to the river, which we have stopped talking since a very long time. So in the end, and these are two photographs as of yesterday in Nayatola Bishambarpur, when the water levels in Gandak River had risen, and today the water levels have receded. So again, you have a toilet which is inundated, and then in the second photograph you have the Faidaman Shauchalaya, which is still standing, and people have the access to it. Now, what we are trying to portray here is that solutions must be devised as per solutions and locations. It is very important for that. We cannot have a uniform strategy, whether it's developmental or it's response or rehabilitation or preparation. Second, whether we like it or not, risks are fairly ignored. We need to look into risks factor. And finally, it is time for us to all reflect. Those who are engaged in working in the flood prone areas or flood affected areas, it is time that we all reflect in terms of what are the changes that we have to make at our end. Thank you very much.
You are on mute, Hari.
Thank you so much. The areas which you actually touched, the first area when you told the character of the river based on the typologies and access to the toilet, the importance of that, and FRH, flood resilient habitat, and the last area which you covered on location-based solutions. Key points which definitely all of us can pick that and then adapt it to the areas where we are working. Thank you so much. Now I would like to move to our next speaker, Dr. Nirmalya Chowdhury.
Yeah.
Topic is challenges, learnings, and possibilities for flood risk management. Some reflections on the recent floods in Assam. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Hari, and thank you, Sphere India, for organizing this very important meeting. And it was so enriching hearing so much of rich details from micro details from all my co-panelists. I know Eklavya has been working on this issue for many years, and he brought in so many elements of complexity. What I'll do is, I don't have a presentation, so I'll just talk. I'll highlight key points. I'll not go into the micro because so beautifully micro details have been laid down. Let me make few macro level points which perhaps we need to keep back of our mind to kind of find answers to some of the questions that we have raised earlier. For example, I had noted down when Karen was saying that mitigation part, we need to think about mitigation. Eklavya ended by talking about risk. So that kind of provokes me to kind of share some of the points at the macro level that I have been kind of looking into when I see floods, how it has kind of evolved over the years. But prior to that, let me very quickly summarize that since I've been saying that reflection on Assam, it's nothing new, at least for many of us who work or who follow floods, who study floods, it's not nothing new for us to see floods in Assam. Every year there is floods in Assam. Every year, if you look into Central Water Commission's data, you will find that every year, this is a recurrent flood prone area. Some years it will have very big impact, a lot of loss. Some year it will have less losses. But let's be very practical, dispassionate about it, that these areas suffer from flood every year, despite all the kind of efforts that have been undertaken in the past. And that also then kind of brings me to the question of that, what are those efforts that are being undertaken? When we talk about flood, what do we essentially are we trying to address? So I would rather argue that historically, we have been, and when I say we, I mean not essentially many of us who are here, who are essentially representing the development community, but largely the big actors, the government, the policymakers who actually set the rules of the game. They are largely, I would say, driven by the understanding of that flood needs to be controlled or flood needs to be managed. Whereas when we kind of try to look into it, we try to talk about flood risks to be managed, flood risks to be controlled, flood risks to be mitigated. So essentially, we need to be clear that we are actually talking about two different things. Floods and flood risk essentially are not same things. So when Aglavia says that we need to talk about risk, we need to talk about flood risk and not essentially about floods. Because if you go back and look into what essentially are floods, floods are extreme natural phenomena which are caused by hydrometeorological events. But essentially we are in this issue of flood, we are concerned about flood because that natural phenomenon then has certain kind of losses because it kind of manifests in those areas which are essentially densely populated. And nowhere you can find what I'm saying much more pertinent than, let's say, in a state like Assam or in parts of Bihar or parts of Eastern UP or even parts of Bengal, where right in the middle of the river on sandbars or fluvial geomorphologists called as sandbar or on chores, you have people residing. So essentially, it's in those areas, your riverbank erosion, your flooding are a natural phenomenon. We are interested in that. We want to work on that because essentially that's also where a lot of people live. Their life and livelihood depends on it. So essentially, it's basically the exposure that kind of motivates us towards talking about flood risk, and add to that an element of that people are essentially kind of have certain kind of propensity to face loss as a result of floods, or even if there is no flood in certain areas, may not be true in case of Kerala, but certainly true in the case of Bihar and West Bengal and Assam, that people do lack multiple resources that they otherwise would need to live a reasonable life and livelihoods. So they are anyway vulnerable. So when this phenomenon called flood kind of interacts with this group of people who are essentially vulnerable, that results in loss. And that's basically what we intend to minimize. So that's what I call as flood risk. Too long, my argument has been, and that I've been arguing in my write-ups, that too long when we talk about how floods needs to be managed, at the policy level, when we draw kind of big rules, there our understanding is that we need to control flood and not flood risk. And that essentially then gets translated into a lot of structural intervention in the form of embankments. Eklavya stated in front of you what embankments per se bring. They additionally it creates an element of risk. So essentially mechanisms which are supposed to control flooding additionally creates an element of risk. So that essentially is how floods have been historically and continues to be looked into. And hence, when we all talk about, when Amol talks or Karen talks or Eklavya talks about flood risk management, and they talk about various constraints, the big elephant in this room, by the way, is not the PhD, not the education department, not the health department. The big elephant in this room is the water resource department, who are essentially the most important actor when it comes to floods. And that is precisely because one has seen flood largely from a controlling point of view, whereas we need to look at flood from a very different point of view, which is mitigating the flood risk. And when you talk about mitigating the flood risk, that essentially means that you need a very different governance mechanism. Again, when I say governance mechanism, what do I mean? I mean, essentially, you need a whole different set of actors, agencies, institutions, new kind of rules, and certain kind of discourses. Eklavya was talking about traditional knowledge, and we have been talking about this in various forums, that indigenous knowledge or indigenous technical knowledge or even heuristics, will they always be taken as an anecdote, or whether they will be part of the mainstream knowledge? What constitutes mainstream knowledge? And that defines policies, that defines bigger rules. That needs to be revisited. Because if you are talking about flood risk, then perhaps only certain kind of knowledge of hydrology and civil engineering will not be enough to address the risk. And there you need a lot more actors, a lot more people actually making rules, making big decisions, arranging for resources. I think you have this issue of resource constraint that comes up at the micro level is ultimately an outcome of decisions taken at a macro level. So if you need more resources for, let's say, education or health, that is essentially to reduce flood risk or any hazard risk, any disaster risk. So that needs to be taken into consideration. So when we say that the governance needs to change, you need a whole new set of actors making decisions when it comes to any kind of disaster. Particularly, I can talk about floods. You need a whole different set of rules, and you need a lot of resource to back up, not just in terms of construction of embankments, which creates additional risk, or bank strengthening to address bank erosion, but you need a lot of resources with respect to education, a lot of resources with health. You already saw in Eklavya's presentation how local innovations like elevated toilets, elevated hand pumps, those are actually through, they have multiple kind of impacts in terms of health, in terms of sanitation, and they actually together build resilience in the long run. So to kind of promote that, and by the way, a cost of an eco-sanitation will perhaps be more than a Swachh Bharat toilet. Will the Swachh Bharat toilet be flexible enough in the flood-prone areas to increase their kind of per unit cost? Will the PHED promote elevated hand pumps? Will the elevated shelters be created at a large scale? These are certain kind of questions that needs to be asked, because, you know, otherwise we will all play in a ground where the rules are set by another group of people, which restricts our effort and at times frustrates us. So that's precisely why it's very important to talk about the distinction of flood and flood risk, and accordingly talk about a whole different system of governance that governs basically the whole flood area. As of now, I would say that flood essentially is looked largely from a very technical, a very straitjacketed manner at the apex level, at the policy level. That needs to be brought in. And my last 2 points, very brief points. I think I want to reiterate some of my what earlier panelists said, that it's good that we are discussing today now that the monsoon is on. A lot of flood discussion takes place only in monsoon, but we will never be able to address or talk about mitigation if you just restrict it to the monsoon season. If you have to build mitigative kind of capacity within the system, you need to do intensive activity in the non-flood months. So flood should not be a business which is taken up only in the flood months. It should be round the year kind of an activity. So that's a very important, I think, learning that we kind of see. And also, this as I said, that if the governance frame has to be enhanced, you need many players in this, setting the rules, the larger rules. So a lot of interagency collaboration, coordination will become very important. Otherwise, people who are working on the ground would actually try their best and get their frustration level would increase when they see that they hit a roadblock. So these are the few points that I thought that might be useful, macro level issues, but maybe they are useful for the audience. Yeah. So I'll end here. I'll stop here for the time.
Thank you, Dr. Nirmal Lechha. the areas, especially the one when you told about why a discussion on flood only during monsoon, very valid point. Most of the almost all the sectors face this kind of issue, especially when you spoke about the policy level understanding of what is flood and the risk involved with flood. Two different areas where people should be able to get that really clear here. So then the thinking completely changes in two different areas. Thank you so much. With this, we'll move to Mr. Ajay. He'll be talking on the importance of community participation in flood preparedness and response. Over to you, Mr. Ajay.
Thank you, Hari Balaji. In fact, my co-panelists have done my job easy. A lot of elements that came across. I'm so glad that there is resonance and synergy in what we are all thinking. So very briefly, I also don't have a presentation, but I'm going to talk on three broad areas where community participation today plays important role. So one is prior, that is flood preparedness activities. The second is overall relief and rehabilitation. And third is, which is nowadays a major phenomenon of climate change and adaptation, because that also plays a critical role in the evolving flood situations in our country today, and how we can see the high level areas for community participation, the scope for community participation in these. So to start with, just building up on what the last panelist mentioned, Professor Nirmalya, is that talking about floods only during monsoon is the biggest mistake that we all end up committing. And therefore, during the peacetime, it is very important to invest into participative activities with the active involvement of the communities in various areas. Now, this of course, when we are talking about the communities, the flood-prone communities, there are two broad categories of flood-prone communities. One, the recurring ones, which so we know that throughout the year, flood is an annual phenomenon in many of these geographies. Assam and parts of Assam, Bihar, Andhra Pradesh, Karnataka, Kerala, Maharashtra over the years. And there is a new set of geographies which are now proving to be flood prone with the climate change and the consequences that we are all facing. So the geographies with recurring flood phenomenon are at least known. Of course, this doesn't mean that their sufferings are any lesser than the other communities, but they're at least known or acquainted with the anticipated risks of flooding. There is some amount of community-based resilience built over the period. And the new geographies which are proving to be flood prone, that is where the communities are hit with a surprise, who are least prepared, who are least anticipating flood situations, either the time of the year when the flood hits them, or the geography when the flood where the flood hits. So these uncertainties that are created as a result of climate change are also to be taken into consideration when we are working towards community-based flood preparedness. And then certain broad areas for preparedness would be then capacity building of the community in form of training, in preventing losses, preventing life or property losses to the extent possible, mitigating those. Second is hazard mapping with the help of the traditional community knowledge, with the help of the community. We must learn to acknowledge and appreciate the knowledge wealth that the community possesses. And with the help of that, we must engage them in hazard mapping, thus early warning and dissemination. With the years, our technological innovations have really taken a major leap in when it comes to flood predictions or flood or such early warning system communications. Now, what is required is the last mile delivery of those messages or last mile dissemination of those messages, communication. And again, here, using the existing networks of the communities is going to be very important. And these could be the socio-political, religious, various types of structures and networks available must be leveraged for this kind of dissemination of the warnings. The other important element, which Mr. Nirmalya very broadly, briefly addressed, is also of structures, preventive or mitigative structures, keeping in mind. Assam, for example, we all know elevated platforms for community shelters, for community toilets, for the hand pumps. It is important to have such structures created at village level in ample numbers so that the preparedness is also achieved to a great extent, where flood is an unavoidable phenomenon. Secondly, coming to the next stage of relief and rehabilitation, we all know of the SPEAR minimum standards of relief and response, and how to ensure that the community at the receiving end, both from the impact of disaster as well as the relief, that community has a major stake in deciding the nature of relief, the content of our relief support, and of course, it has to be delivered in a dignified manner. I have, over the years, I would like to cite a few examples of how communities' role in coordination of relief and relief, especially relief and rehabilitation, changes from places to places in our country. Have seen the recent flood situation in Kerala in 2018-19, and was mesmerized by looking at the amount of active participation the local panchayat members have had in determining the relief distribution, identification of the beneficiaries, no matter which NGO, no matter whether the government-led support, but most of those relief supports were routed through the panchayat representatives of the local community. And this really means active community participation, community having good hold over such relief distribution. This also then increases the chances of comprehensive relief support, so that it is not that a few communities get supported more and a few communities are neglected. So that kind of participation is really very, very important. The other example I would like to take from the recent visits I made to Assam as part of flood response, and looking at the empowerment the local village committees have, is that where houses have been washed away as a result of breach to the river embankments, and within a few days or overnight also in places, the village committees have been able to erect temporary shelters for those families, and the families did not really have to suffer or go outside of the village in search for the temporary shelter. And the shelters created are also decent enough in a dignified manner so that the privacy of the families is taken care of. The families have their own space to store their goods, to store the relief material they received during the period. So what was important in interaction with these village committee members was that the autonomy that they have, the empowerment that they have, the resources that they have been already provisioned with. It is not the administration or the divisional commissioner who has to dictate and then these shelters get erected. The village committees know their role, village committees know how and where to erect such shelters. And this is something I think a lot of other geographies in our country have to learn from Assam like geography, how the local the last unit of administration can be empowered to take care of immediate rescue or relief for the flood affected communities. The other aspect of flood management I wanted to talk about is the climate change and climate adaptation. And to begin with, I must highlight that unfortunately, with the global level dialogues or the apex level dialogues that are taking place on the topic of climate adaptation and climate challenge, we run the risk of not involving the communities in those dialogues and keep them academic, keep them theoretical, keep them in limited to a certain class or certain section of people who are engaging in a dialogue for the sake of understanding these concepts and determining the planning or strategies or coping mechanisms. However, the communities at risk, communities residing in these flood-prone geographies must have a stake in these dialogues. They need to be brought to pace. We need to have these dialogues at their level so that it is understandable for them. They realize the importance of climate adaptation and they are engaged in the dialogues for where we are planning the developmental activities. How do we adapt certain strategies so that the developmental activities or infrastructure that we are working, the infrastructural projects that we are working towards have minimized impact on the environment. And these dialogues or these decision making should not or need not be restricted at the government level or at the apex level where only certain intelligentsia is involved in those dialogues. So we need to break the barriers and we need to bring these conversations into the community at their level, make it relevant to them, engage them in the decision making so that adaptation is more participative. With this, I would like to take a pause here, Hari. And these were the key points I wanted to highlight about community participation.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mr. Ajay. Understanding that floods are annual phenomenon, and the main area which when you stressed on the local networks to be leveraged to its max and getting the indigenous knowledge from the locals, understanding, and the last unit of the administration playing a vital role when they're empowered. Of course, working in Kerala, I've also witnessed that. Thank you so much. Thank all the speakers. Now we'll be open for a couple of questions from the participants if they're interested. Like we can take 2 questions. We have time for 2 questions from the participants. You can post it in the chat box and I can ask to the respective speaker.
Hari,
Yes.
I just have a small query from Dr. Nirmalya.
Yes.
Sir, we all know that flood is actually a havoc for, or maybe a havoc for the community. But there must be a lot of advantages also of floods. Like floods bring sediments, it brings new seeds, so it enriches biodiversity also. So again, we can see it in that terms also. So it again rests up to the like it needs better management. It needs adaptation, resilience of community, so that it cannot be called a disaster.
No, I think this is a good point that you are saying. This could be answered at multiple levels. First, look, historically, right from our colonial times and continued by the post-colonial period, you have seen flood as something that causes loss and that needs to be controlled. Whereas ideally one should have talked about flood risk and how to mitigate flood risk or minimize flood risk. So essentially, as an outcome of that, one started constructing embankments, and which did not stop flooding at all. Otherwise, we would not have talked today. It only reduced the area of flooding, constricted the area of flooding, which essentially, end of the day, failed to stop flooding per se. There were kind of breaches on a regular basis in the embankment, and a large area as a result faced loss. You are absolutely correct when you say that the floods historically has kind of contributed to a lot of benefit. If one looks into a very interesting lecture by Sir William Wilcox in 1930, he was a British engineer who built the Aswan Dam on Nile. And he actually talks about the rich history of overflow irrigation and breaching of riverbanks by farmers to ensure that the top flood water, which carries fine silt, is brought to the agricultural field, which will result in what we today call as fertigation. But we have also need to understand now that those floodplains are no more the floodplains that it used to be. With the construction activities that have taken place, the built environment of the floodplain and the natural environment of the floodplain are very different. And you saw in Eklavya's presentation how the built environment actually creates new element of risk. So we are currently operating in a very different kind of floodplain environment. In that environment, to expect that the floods will continue to kind of create or continue to benefit people is perhaps not entirely correct. However, what is also important, and my last point here is, so what can we do? And I think one thing that we need to think about is, will floods be seen as a liability or will it be seen as an asset? So a patch of land which remains flood prone and inundated for a long period of time and is out for agriculture practice is seen as a liability. But the moment I can convert that patch of land as an area for fisheries, it becomes an asset to me. So that requires a whole different mindset. How do I increase or maximize the productivity from an asset which otherwise, land which was my asset has become a liability? How can once again it be an asset? But that requires a whole different way of thinking. That's where you talk about the mitigating the risk, increasing the flood-proof nature of the social system. But as long as you see floods more as something that needs to be controlled largely through embankment and largely through bank strengthening or even engineering, so a large out of 100 rupees, 95 rupees would be spent there. Only 5 rupees would come for your health, education, livelihood, agriculture, animal husbandry, and other activities. And until unless those are taken care of, we will always talk about resilience in conferences and meetings, but actually on field, we will not be able to see or measure achievements. That's it.
We have a question. What all early warning signal apps are built within Google Play Store to be used by the local citizen as an update or an alert? Can Google Map be integrated with such alerts based Google Maps? And the other area, because the reason he's stating is that because most of us are connected through Google. Would you like to take that, Ms. Karen?
Sure. So I think technology, is actually a great facilitator. It is not the solution. And I like to point this out very often because people think of it as the panacea for all evils. It's not. It also causes the digital divide. But definitely it's a great facilitator and a great tool to use during times of emergencies. And something as simple as geotagging can have profound benefits and impact on your operations, on your solutions, and on the benefits for your community. Because when you can create photographs that are genuine and authenticated, okay, one is the message is loud and clear and very, very direct, okay. Two is obviously it will help you to reach out to more donors and policymakers. And three is, of course, there is data which is so valuable that can be then fed into so many other kind of reports and action points. Having said that, that is of course a very, very basic, and that's actually how we started when we first got started during the pandemic, right? But slowly, of course, we moved into other tools, that we used, whether it was for data collection, and Kobo again is a very simple way to kind of do it. There are many other mapping tools that have been created, and a lot of them are freely available that can be used to identify exactly what is happening where, how do you get the data. The problem is not in technology tools availability. There are a plethora of them available, yeah? And the problem, I would say, and I don't like to use the word problem too often because that kind of puts your focus on the problem rather than on solution. So I would say to move away from the problem. The solution really is in one, what you spoke about, the integratedness of these tools, which doesn't become not very, very easy. So that also is changing today, okay? Because you don't need to know coding to be able to, start to having your own app, literally, right? It is becoming that simple, number one. But I think more than anything else, I think what we need to understand is the mapping behind the scenes, not just the integration of softwares. That also happens. That is also possible at the end of the day. But the kind of mapping that you need, the whole AI piece that we have been talking about, okay, where so much is going gaga about, AI does not work unless you have millions of data points, which most of us don't have for what we want to do, right? Which means we still need human intelligence, right? HI, we still need HI. And unfortunately, we don't tend to spend enough time on that. If you can take data, and in fact, I have a big problem with big data, and I always tell people this, we don't need any more big data. We have enough of reports and researches and, data collection that has happened. What we need is live data, data that you can use on the ground, information that you can take to make your decisions, right? And that is the key of using technology. How do you create data points that someone can actually use and go back with, because it will have complete relevance to what they are doing in their location? I think, and that is the key question when you're talking about, apps and talking about technology to be used. And that's the role we've been trying to play. But of course, it's not easy, because first is you have to get the data, and two is then map, different kinds of sets of information so that you can relay it back to the right people for how they want to use it, whether it is the community that Ajay was talking about, whether it is the policymakers that Nirmala was talking about, or whether it is the entrepreneurs who are coming up with great solutions and innovations that Eklawai was talking about. I'm sorry he's not here, but essentially that is how you have to create data and technology use, not just simply having a, remoteless, robotless approach to that. Yeah.
Can I add a point? Yeah.
Yes, sir.
So I think, science and modeling is essentially a means to the end and not the end itself. So we actually, until and unless, I'm talking from a disaster management point of view, until and unless the farthest of the villages, the remotest of the villages are able to access the information in time such that they can minimize their losses, to me, then the whole effort is of no use if that is not the case. Because end of the day, we might be very happy that our technology is improving, but our models are becoming much more error-free. But still, until unless they are actually being accessed, or if one can access them on ground by the community and by the remote, not by the people living in South Bombay or South Delhi. So that's where the big challenge lies. And that's where I think we need to think about, not on the technology dimension, but institutional dimension. How new institutions, I've recently argued in one of my articles that you are creating institutions, tired institutions under NRLM. So can you leverage on some of those institutions to kind of address this information asymmetry? So that would be something to think about.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I'd like to thank each and every speaker who shared the wealth of knowledge today in this stipulated time. Each one can be expanded to another session, complete whole session. Thank you so much. I'd like to thank Mr. Amal Krishna from UNICEF, Ms. Karen Shaiva from Hoypikanet, and Mr. Ekalve Prasad from Make Pyan Abhiyan, and Dr. Amulya from PIS Mumbai, and Mr. Ajay Govley from United Way Mumbai. Thank you so much. And we will be hosting more sessions, and definitely we would like to see you in these forthcoming sessions again. Thank you, each one of you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much.